The old floorboards splintered with a crack that echoed through the abandoned cabin, revealing not rotting wood underneath, but a metal container that would change 3 lives forever. What started as a desperate attempt to escape bankruptcy became the discovery of a fortune that someone had killed to protect 40 years ago. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Marcus Bennett stood in the doorway of the dilapidated cabin, his weathered hands gripping the rusted key his late grandmother had pressed into his palm just days before her death. At 42, with graying temples and shoulders that carried the weight of a failing construction business, he looked older than his years. The morning light filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the overgrown path that led to what had once been the family's most cherished retreat. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter Emma shifted nervously, her green eyes so like her late mother's surveying the wreckage of what had once been the family's summer retreat. She pulled her jacket tighter against the mountain chill, a gesture that reminded Marcus painfully of Sarah. His wife had always been cold in the mountains, always needed that extra layer, that extra moment by the fire. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Emma asked, stepping carefully over a broken threshold. "This place looks like it might collapse if we sneeze too hard." Marcus forced a smile he didn't feel. "It's all we've got left, Em. Either we fix it up and sell it, or we lose the house in Denver too." The truth was even worse than he'd let on. The bank had been patient, more patient than they deserved, but patience had limits. 3 missed payments on the business loan, 2 on the house. The credit cards maxed out, trying to keep the business afloat after they lost the Morrison Center contract to a competitor who'd underbid them by 30%. How they'd make any profit at those prices, Marcus couldn't fathom, but it didn't matter. The work was gone, and with it, their lifeline. The cabin sat on 40 acres of Colorado wilderness, tucked into a valley where cell phone signals went to die, and the nearest neighbor lived 8 miles away. Marcus's grandmother, Rose Bennett, had inherited it from her father in the 1962, and the family had spent countless summers here until his grandfather's death 15 years ago. After that, Rose couldn't bear to visit, and the cabin had been left to slowly surrender to the elements. Marcus remembered those summers with painful clarity. Now, Emma taking her first steps on the cabin's porch, Sarah teaching her to identify wildflowers on the mountain trails, the 4 of them, back when there had been 4, roasting marshmallows over the outdoor fire pit his grandfather had built with stones from the creek. Sarah had loved this place, had talked about retiring here someday. "When we're old and gray," she'd say, "we'll sit on that porch and watch the elk pass by. And I'll finally have time to read all those books I've been collecting." The books were still in boxes in their basement. Sarah had been gone 2 years, 3 months, and 5 days. Not that Marcus was counting. Behind them, Marcus's best friend and business partner Jake Morrison unloaded tools from the truck. At 45, Jake was built like the linebacker he'd been in college, his dark skin glistening with sweat despite the cool mountain air. The construction company they'd built together over 2 decades was bleeding money, hemorrhaging clients to bigger firms that could afford to undercut their bids. "Place has good bones," Jake said, ever the optimist. "Nothing we can't handle." Jake had been there through everything the early days, when they'd worked out of Marcus's garage. The boom years, when they'd had more work than they could handle, and now the decline. He'd been there the night the police came to tell Marcus about the accident, had held him up at Sarah's funeral, had practically moved in for those first terrible months when Marcus couldn't function and Emma needed someone stable. Marcus wasn't so sure about the cabin's bones. The roof sagged like a broken spine, half the windows were shattered, and something had been nesting in what used to be the living room. But they had no choice. The bank had given them 90 days to pay off their business loan or face bankruptcy. Their only hope was to restore this cabin and sell it to some city dweller looking for a mountain retreat. They spent the first day just clearing debris. Emma worked alongside them, her initial reluctance giving way to curiosity as they uncovered remnants of the cabin's past. A cast-iron stove that had somehow survived intact, hand-carved wooden beams that spoke of craftsmanship from another era, and in a protected corner, a faded photograph of Marcus's great-grandfather standing proudly beside the newly built cabin in 1952. Emma held the photo carefully, studying the man she'd never met. He looks like you, Dad. Same nose, same way of standing with his weight on his left foot. Marcus looked closer. She was right. William Bennett stood with the same slight lean Marcus had developed after years of favoring his left knee, an old construction injury that acted up in cold weather. He built this whole place by himself, Marcus told Emma, carefully extracting the photo from its broken frame. Took him 3 years, working only on weekends. Why so long? Emma asked. He was a bank manager in Denver during the week. This was his escape, his dream. He used to say that a man needed a place where the world couldn't find him. Jake chuckled from across the room where he was assessing the fireplace damage. Sounds like he was running from something. The comment was meant lightly, but it landed heavy. Marcus had always wondered about that. His great-grandfather, William Bennett, had been a respected figure in Sutton, Denver's banking community, but there had always been whispers, half-heard stories that stopped abruptly when children entered the room. Rose had taken whatever secrets she knew to her grave, leaving only the cabin and a lifetime of unanswered questions. Her final words to him haunted Marcus now. She'd been lucid at the end, more lucid than she'd been in months, had gripped his hand with surprising strength and pulled him close. "The cabin will provide," she'd whispered. "When you truly need it, it will provide. Your great-grandfather made sure of that." He'd thought it was the morphine talking, the ramblings of a dying woman. Now, standing in the ruins of that promise, he wondered. Emma had retreated to a corner with a broom, attacking cobwebs with determined efficiency. She'd been doing that a lot lately, throwing herself into tasks to avoid thinking. Marcus recognized the behavior because he did the same thing. If you kept moving, kept working, you could almost forget the Sarah-shaped hole in your life. "Remember when Mom tried to convince that raccoon to leave the attic?" Emma said suddenly, not looking at him. She spent 3 hours reading to it from that book about peaceful coexistence with wildlife. Marcus smiled despite himself, and the raccoon fell asleep. She was so proud of that. She said everything just needed the right words, the right tone. Emma's voice cracked slightly. "I miss her, Dad." "Me too, baby. Me too." By the end of the first week, they had cleared most of the debris and begun assessing the real damage. The news wasn't good. The foundation had shifted in several places, creating cracks that ran up the walls like lightning bolts. The plumbing was completely shot, pipes burst from decades of freezing winters. The electrical wiring was a fire hazard waiting to happen, cloth-insulated wires that belonged in a museum, not a home. "We're looking at maybe $40,000 in materials alone," Jake calculated one evening as they sat on the porch, sharing a beer and watching the sunset behind the mountains. Not to mention the time. Marcus rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 42 years. The math was simple and brutal. "We don't have $40,000. We've got maybe $8,000 if we max out the last credit card." "Then we do what we always do," Jake said. "We get creative, salvage what we can, barter for what we can't buy, and work our asses off." It's what they'd always done, from the beginning. Marcus remembered their first real job, renovating Mrs. Chen's kitchen with more enthusiasm than skill, having to redo the tile 3 times before getting it right. She'd been patient with them, had become their first repeat customer, and recommended them to everyone she knew. They'd built the business on reputation and relationships, not flashy advertising or cutting corners. But relationships didn't pay for materials, and reputation didn't satisfy creditors. Emma had been quieter than usual since her mother's death. The car accident that took Sarah had left both father and daughter adrift, going through the motions of daily life without really living. This project, Marcus hoped, might give them both something to focus on besides their grief. The accident had been nobody's fault and everybody's fault. A patch of black ice, a turn taken too fast by the other driver, Sarah, on her way home from her shift at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse. The other driver had survived a teenager who'd been speeding to get home before curfew. Marcus didn't blame the kid. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. But sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, he wondered how different life would be if she'd left the hospital 5 minutes earlier or later. "I found something weird today," Emma announced one morning during their second week. She led them to a small room off the kitchen that had probably been a pantry. "Look at the floor here." Where she pointed, the floorboards formed a subtle but distinct pattern, different from the rest of the cabin. The wood was newer, the craftsmanship less refined than the original construction. But it wasn't just different, it was deliberately different, as if someone had wanted it to be noticed eventually, probably repaired after water damage, Jake suggested, but Marcus knelt for a closer look. No, look at the edges. Someone cut through the original floor and replaced this section. And these nails, he pointed to the fasteners, these are from the 1970s, maybe early 82nds. Grandpa would have been alive then. I wonder why he never mentioned doing repairs. His grandfather had been meticulous about the cabin, keeping detailed records of every improvement, every repair. Marcus had found the ledger in the debris, pages and pages of careful notes about replaced shingles and repaired steps. But nothing about replacing a section of floor in the pantry. They had too much other work to investigate further, but Marcus found his thoughts returning to that odd patch of flooring. There was something deliberate about it, something that nagged at the back of his mind like a half-remembered dream. The restoration progressed slowly. They worked from sunrise to sunset, Emma dividing her time between helping and studying for her junior year classes. She'd insisted on doing her schoolwork independently while they were at the cabin, not wanting to fall behind. Marcus watched her sometimes when she didn't know he was looking, saw Sarah in the way she chewed her pencil when concentrating, in the way she hummed tunelessly while reading. The resemblance was a comfort and a knife blade, all at once. You don't have to be here, he told her one evening as she struggled with calculus by lantern light. You could stay with the Johnsons until school starts. Emma looked up, and the expression on her face was pure Sarah, that mix of stubbornness and love that had always defeated his arguments. We're a team, Dad. Mom always said that. Teams stick together. Jake's cousin, a plumber who owed him several favors from an incident involving a flooded basement and an alibied poker game, agreed to help with the plumbing in exchange for Jake's help on a future project. An electrician from their network of construction contacts gave them a discount in exchange for Marcus building custom cabinets for his kitchen. Slowly, painfully, the cabin began to resurrect itself. The work was hard, but satisfying in a way their recent projects hadn't been. There was something about bringing a family property back to life, about touching the same beams his great-grandfather had shaped, that connected Marcus to something larger than himself. He found himself talking to William as he worked, asking questions that would never be answered. "Why here?" he'd mutter, wrestling with a particularly stubborn beam. "Why build so far from everything? What were you looking for out here?" It was during the 4th week, while replacing rotten floorboards in the main room, that everything changed. Marcus was alone that day. Jake had driven to Denver for supplies, and Emma was down by the creek, claiming she needed to concentrate on a calculus assignment away from the noise of power tools. Marcus had been prying up boards systematically, checking the joists underneath for rot. The work was monotonous, rhythmic. Pry, pull, toss. Pry, pull, toss. His mind wandered to bills and deadlines, to Emma's college fund that he'd had to raid, to Sarah and how she would have loved seeing the cabin come back to life. The crowbar slipped, driving deeper than Marcus intended, and the floorboard didn't just crack, it shattered, revealing not the expected subfloor, but a metal surface. Marcus's heart began to race. He carefully removed more boards, his movements now precise and deliberate, revealing what appeared to be a steel container about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. Built into the floor itself, it was sealed with a heavy padlock that had rusted but not failed. For a long moment, Marcus just stared. His mind cycled through possibilities: a time capsule, old family documents, maybe bonds or stock certificates. His grandmother's words echoed, "The cabin will provide." Then, with shaking hands, he reached for his phone to call Jake, only to remember there was no signal. He was alone with this discovery, whatever it was. The padlock was strong but not impervious to 40 years of moisture. After 20 minutes of work with a hacksaw, it fell away. Marcus paused, some instinct warning him that opening this container would change everything. He thought of Pandora's box, of secrets that should stay buried. Then he thought of the foreclosure notice sitting on his desk in Denver, of Emma's college dreams evaporating, of everything they stood to lose. He lifted the lid. Cash. Stacks and stacks of cash, wrapped in plastic and seemingly untouched by time. The bills were old hundreds from the 1970s and early 1980s, but cash didn't expire. Beneath the money were documents, photographs, and at the very bottom, 3 gold bars that gleamed dully in the afternoon light filtering through the newly repaired windows. Marcus sat back on his heels, mind reeling. He carefully counted the visible bills, all hundreds, all from the 1,970 seconds and early 1,980 seconds. A rough estimate put it at over $2 million in cash alone. The gold bars, depending on their purity and current prices, could be worth even more. But it was the documents that made his hands truly shake. Bank records showing massive transfers, photographs of his great-grandfather with men Marcus didn't recognize, and newspaper clippings about a bank heist in 1982 where $12 million had vanished without a trace. The main article was from the Denver Post, yellowed with age but still legible. 12 million vanishes in elaborate bank heist. Federal investigators are baffled by the disappearance of $12 million in cash and gold bullion intended for a major infrastructure project. The armored car carrying the funds was found abandoned on a mountain road, its guards unconscious but unharmed. This appears to be an inside job of the highest order, said Special Agent Patricia Morse. Someone with intimate knowledge of our security procedures orchestrated this theft. First Colorado Bank Vice President William Bennett, who helped coordinate the transfer, could not be reached for comment at his mountain cabin. "No," Marcus whispered. "No, this can't be right." But the evidence was overwhelming. His great-grandfather, the respected bank manager, had been involved in one of the largest unsolved bank thefts in Colorado history. The cabin hadn't been a weekend retreat, it had been a hiding place. His hands shaking, Marcus delved deeper into the documents. There were detailed plans, handwritten notes in his great-grandfather's distinctive script, photographs of the armored car route. Everything pointed to an elaborate inside job, planned over months, if not years. Marcus heard footsteps on the porch and quickly closed the container, pulling a tarp over the exposed section of floor. Emma entered, calculus textbook in hand, her face flushed from the walk up from the creek. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," he managed. "How's the studying going?" She shrugged, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Emma had always been too perceptive, too quick to notice when something was off. She'd gotten that from her mother. Sarah had always known when he was keeping something from her, could read his moods like a map. "Fine," Jake called from the road. "He'll be here in about an hour with the supplies." She paused, studying his face. "Dad, what's under the tarp?" "Rot damage," Marcus said quickly. "Worse than I thought. We'll need to replace more of the subfloor." Emma didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. After she went to her room, they'd managed to make one bedroom livable in the past weeks. Marcus returned to the container. He needed to understand what he'd found before deciding what to do about it. The documents painted a picture that shattered everything Marcus thought he knew about his family. William Bennett hadn't just worked at First Colorado Bank, he'd been a senior vice president with access to the highest security vaults. In 1982, he'd been part of a team overseeing the transfer of $12 million in cash and gold, payment for a massive federal construction project. The money never made it to its destination. The armored car was found abandoned, its guards unconscious but unharmed, claiming they remembered nothing after stopping for a staged accident. The investigation had focused on the guards and the armored car company, but no one had seriously suspected the respectable bank executive who'd helped plan the route. According to handwritten notes in his great-grandfather's careful script, it had been almost perfect. He'd had inside help the photographs showed him with 2 other men Marcus didn't recognize. They'd split the money 3 ways, agreeing to wait 10 years before touching it, but something had gone wrong. A newspaper clipping from 1983 reported that William Bennett had died of a heart attack at his cabin. His body found by his son Marcus's grandfather during a family visit. Another clipping from 1985 mentioned that one of the men in the photographs had died in a car accident. The third man, according to a note in the margins, had disappeared entirely. Marcus understood now why his grandfather had never returned to the cabin after finding his father's body. He must have suspected something, might have even found some evidence, but had chosen to let sleeping dogs lie. And Rose, Marcus's grandmother, had kept the secret, passing the cabin to Marcus just before her death with only the cryptic words, "Some things are better left buried, but if you ever truly need it, the cabin will provide." She had known, All these years, she had known what was hidden here. "Dad?" Jake's voice from outside made Marcus jump. "You in there? I could use some help unloading." Marcus quickly closed the container and replaced enough floorboards to hide it, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do with this discovery? The money was stolen, but everyone involved was dead. The statute of limitations had long passed for the theft itself, but possession of stolen money was still a crime. And yet, he desperately needed this money. Not all of it, just enough to save his business, his house, Emma's future. The rationalization came easily, too easily. Who would it hurt? The bank had been paid by insurance. The insurance company had long since written off the loss. No one was looking for this money anymore. And hadn't his family already paid a price? His great-grandfather dead at 62, his grandfather haunted by suspicions, his grandmother keeping a terrible secret. He helped Jake unload supplies, trying to act normal while his thoughts churned. As they worked, a plan began to form. He couldn't use the old bills, they'd raised too many questions. But the gold. Gold could be sold quietly, a bit at a time. Enough to pay off the business loans, fix the cabin properly, maybe even set aside money for Emma's college. "You all right?" Jake asked as they carried in lumber. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking about Sarah," Marcus lied, hating himself for using his dead wife as an excuse. "Being here, working with my hands. She always said I was happiest when I was building something." It was true, at least. Sarah had understood him in ways no one else did. She would have known immediately that something had changed, would have gotten the truth out of him within hours. But Sarah wasn't here, and the burden of this secret was his alone. Jake squeezed his shoulder in silent sympathy. They'd been friends since high school, been best man at each other's weddings, held each other up through divorce, Jake's and death, Marcus's. If there was anyone Marcus could trust with this secret, it was Jake. But trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not yet. That night, as Emma slept and Jake snored in his sleeping bag in the main room, Marcus lay awake planning. He'd need to research gold buyers, figure out how to sell it without raising suspicions. He'd need a story for where the money came from when he paid off the loans. He'd need a floorboard creaked outside his door. Marcus froze, listening. Another creak, deliberate and careful. Someone was trying to move quietly through the cabin. He slipped out of bed, grabbing the hammer from his tool belt. The door to his room was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see a shadow moving in the moonlight from the windows they'd repaired. The shadow stopped at the spot where Marcus had found the container. Heart pounding, Marcus pushed the door open. "Who's there?" The figure spun around, and Marcus found himself facing a man in his 60s, thin and weathered, with eyes that glittered dangerously in the darkness. He held a gun, pointed directly at Marcus's chest. "Well," the stranger said, his voice gravelly and tinged with frustration, "I was hoping to do this quietly, but I suppose, after 40 years, what's a little more complication?" "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, though he was already afraid he knew. "Name's Robert Carson. I believe your great-grandfather and I were business partners, once upon a time. I've come for my share." The man moved into the moonlight, and Marcus could see him more clearly. Prison tattoos covered his arms, and his face had the hard look of someone who'd spent decades looking over his shoulder. This was what 40 years of running looked like. Jake stirred in the main room. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Tell your friend to go back to sleep," Carson said quietly. "No need for anyone else to get involved in old family business." "It's okay, Jake," Marcus called, never taking his eyes off the gun, just checking something. "Go back to sleep." There was a pause, then the sound of Jake settling back into his sleeping bag. Marcus knew his friend well enough to know he'd be alert now, listening, ready. "Smart man," Carson said. "Now, let's discuss this civilized-like. Your great-grandpa, my partner Tommy Nash and I had an agreement, equal shares. Billy got greedy, tried to cut us out. Tommy died for it, that weren't no accident. I had to disappear, start a new life, always looking over my shoulder. That was 40 years ago," Marcus said. "Whatever happened? What happened is your family's been sitting on my money for 4 decades, while I've been living like a rat, afraid to show my face. Afraid Billy's connections would find me, but Billy's long dead, ain't he? And word gets around. Heard his granddaughter died, left the cabin to her grandson, figured it was time to collect what's mine." Carson moved closer, the gun steady. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. You found it today, didn't you? Don't bother lying. I saw how you acted after, all nervous and twitchy. 2 weeks." This man had been watching them for 2 weeks, watching Emma, watching everything. The violation of it made Marcus's skin crawl. "Look," he said carefully, "I only found it today. I haven't touched anything. We can work this out." Carson laughed, a harsh sound in the darkness. "Work it out? Boy, your great-grandpa killed my partner and stole our shares. Only thing to work out is how this ends. See, I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. I want what's mine, and then I want to disappear for good. Question is whether you and yours disappear too." "Dad?" Emma's voice from her doorway made both men turn. She stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide with fear, looking so young, so much like Sarah in that moment that Marcus's heart broke. "Get back in your room," Marcus ordered, but Carson had already shifted the gun to point at her. Well, this complicates things. Pretty girl, looks like her grandma. I remember Rose from the bank. Billy was sweet on her, part of why he wanted the whole score for himself. "Leave her alone," Marcus growled, stepping between Carson and Emma. "This is between you and me." "Nothing personal, kid," Carson said to Emma, though he kept the gun trained on her. "Just business that should have been settled before you were born." Marcus could see Emma's mind working, see her trying to process what was happening. She was smart, too smart. She was already putting pieces together, the hidden money, this man's claim, the gun pointed at her. That's when Jake made his move. Marcus's friend had crept up behind Carson while the old man was distracted by Emma. The tackle was perfect, years of football training paying off as Jake drove Carson to the ground. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and Marcus heard Emma scream. In the chaos that followed Jake and Carson wrestling for the gun, Marcus rushing to help Emma did something that would have made her mother proud. She grabbed Marcus's cell phone and ran outside, far enough to get a single bar of signal, and called 911. "My name is Emma Bennett," Marcus heard her say, her voice remarkably calm. "We're at the old Bennett cabin on Forest Service Road 47. A man with a gun is threatening my father. He fired a shot. Please hurry." By the time the police arrived, Jake had subdued Carson, though not without cost. The old man had gotten in a lucky punch that left Jake with a black eye and a split lip. The bullet had gone into the ceiling, harming nothing but old wood. Carson, faced with arrest, began talking immediately, seeming almost relieved to finally tell the story he'd kept for 40 years. He confirmed what the document suggested. The three men had planned the heist together, but William Bennett had gotten greedy. He'd murdered Tommy Nash, made it look like an accident, and hidden all the money at the cabin. "Should have known Billy had a bad ticker," Carson said as they led him away in handcuffs. The stress of what he'd done must have got to him. Dead barely a year later. All that money, and he never got to spend a dime. "Guilt's a poison," one of the officers commented. "Eats you up from inside." The investigation that followed turned Marcus's life inside out. Federal agents swarmed the cabin, cataloging every bill, every document, every piece of evidence. The story made national news. Family discovers grandfather's $12 million secret. Marcus, Jake, and Emma were subjected to intense scrutiny, their every financial record examined. The media attention was relentless. Reporters camped outside their Denver home, followed Emma to school, ambushed Jake at job sites. Everyone wanted to know how it felt to discover your family's dark secret, to learn your heritage was built on blood money. Emma handled it with remarkable grace, but Marcus could see the toll it took. She'd already lost her mother. Now she was losing her family's reputation, her sense of identity. "I keep thinking about great-great-grandpa," she told Marcus one evening, after a particularly aggressive reporter had cornered her at school. "Do you think he was always bad, or did he just make one terrible choice?" "I don't know, baby," Marcus admitted. "Maybe both, maybe neither. People are complicated." In the end, the authorities determined that Marcus had no knowledge of the crime before finding the hidden container. The statute of limitations had indeed passed on the theft itself, but the money still belonged to the insurance company that had covered the loss 40 years ago, or at least most of it did. The lead FBI agent, a woman named Patricia Chen, pulled Marcus aside after one of his many interviews. "Off the record, She said, "We've accounted for approximately $10.8 million in cash and gold. The insurance records from 1,982 are a bit fuzzy on exact amounts. Inflation, you understand, and 40-year-old paperwork isn't always perfectly preserved." Marcus understood. Someone, probably his great-grandfather, in those final months had spent or hidden elsewhere about $1.2 million, money that no one was actively looking for anymore. "Your grandmother was a smart woman," Agent Chen continued. "She left you some property in Denver, correct? Some old investment properties she'd held for decades?" Marcus nodded slowly. Rose had left him 3 small rental properties, buildings he'd never paid much attention to because they were in trust until her death. He'd assumed they were modest investments, nothing special. "Funny thing about real estate purchased in the early 1982s with cash," Chen said. "Very hard to trace the source of funds after so many years. Your grandmother was quite the investor, it seems." After she left, Marcus sat on the cabin's repaired porch, watching Emma help Jake sand the new deck railing. The FBI's construction crew had finished what they'd started, completing the restoration as they searched for additional hidden compartments. They'd found nothing else, but they'd finished the work Marcus had started. The cabin was beautiful now, fully restored to its original glory and beyond. New windows gleamed, the roof stood strong and straight, fresh stain brought out the warm tones of the logs. It was what William Bennett had probably envisioned when he'd built it a mountain sanctuary, a place of peace. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The media attention had an unexpected benefit. Marcus's construction company was flooded with calls from people curious about the firm that had discovered the hidden fortune. Jake had fielded the inquiries brilliantly, turning curiosity into contracts. They'd have enough work to keep busy for the next 2 years. You know what's funny? Emma said during dinner that night, their first meal in the fully restored cabin, great-great-grandpa spent all that time planning the perfect crime, hiding the money, keeping it secret. And in the end, it saved us anyway, just not how he planned. "How, do you figure?" Jake asked, helping himself to more of the stew Marcus had made. "Well, if we hadn't been desperate to fix up the cabin, we never would have found the money. And if we hadn't found it, that Carson guy might have snuck in while we were gone, taken it, and disappeared. Instead, he's in jail. The insurance company got most of their money back, and we got enough publicity to save the business." Marcus smiled at his daughter's optimism. She didn't know about the rental properties, about the money that had already been laundered into legitimate assets decades ago. That was a secret he'd keep, using the rental income to ensure Emma could attend any college she chose. "Plus," Emma continued, "we got to keep the cabin, and it looks amazing now." She was right. The FBI's construction crew had done excellent work. The cabin stood proud and solid again, a testament to both its original builder and its restorers. They'd even found and framed more family photographs hidden in the walls, images of William Bennett that showed him as Marcus preferred to remember him. A craftsman, a dreamer, a man who'd built something beautiful even if he'd lost his way. That night was the first really cold one of the fall, and they sat around the restored fireplace, Jake telling embarrassing stories about Marcus from high school while Emma laughed and demanded more details. The warmth filled the cabin, chasing away shadows both old and new. "Remember when you tried to impress Melissa Crawford by doing a backflip off the high dive?" Jake was saying. "And you landed flat on your back?" The entire pool went silent, Marcus groaned. "I thought I died." "You turned the most amazing shade of red," Jake continued, "like a full-body sunburn," Emma giggled. "Did Melissa notice?" "Oh, she noticed," Marcus said. "She dated Jake instead. For about a week," Jake added, "until she realized I couldn't help her with algebra. It felt good to laugh, to be normal for a moment, to be just a family sharing stories by a fire, not the people at the center of a 40-year-old scandal." Carson had been sentenced to 15 years at his age, likely a life sentence. During the trial, more details had emerged about William Bennett's final year. He'd been consumed by guilt, according to Carson's testimony, paranoid and unable to enjoy his ill-gotten gains. He'd written letters to his family that he never sent, all destroyed except for one that Carson had intercepted, in which William confessed his crimes and begged forgiveness. Marcus had asked for a copy of that letter. He kept it in his desk drawer now, still sealed. Someday he'd read it. Not yet. Dad, Emma said as the fire burned low. What are we going to do with the cabin now? Keep it? Sell it? Marcus looked around the room, at the walls that had sheltered 4 generations of Bennetts, that had hidden terrible secrets and offered second chances. I think we keep it, he said. Some things are worth holding on to despite their history, or maybe because of it. Jake raised his beer. To the cabin, then. And a family secrets that save you instead of destroying you. They clinked bottles and mugs, the sound ringing through the restored space. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the mountains in fresh white that covered old tracks and made everything new. The restoration was complete, but the real work, the work of rebuilding trust, of moving forward, of creating new memories to overlay the old that would take years, Marcus was ready for it. He had his daughter, his best friend, his business, and a cabin in the mountains that had taught him that sometimes the worst family secrets could lead to unexpected redemption. What started as a desperate attempt to salvage a failing business had uncovered a fortune in hidden money, yes, but more importantly, it had revealed the true treasures, the bonds of family and friendship that no amount of gold could buy, the resilience that comes from facing hard truths, and the understanding that even the darkest secrets lose their power when brought into the light. The cabin stood solid and renewed against the winter storm, its windows glowing warmly, a beacon of hope for anyone who'd ever believed their story was over, only to discover it was just beginning a new chapter. Inside, 3 people who'd arrived, broken and desperate, had found something worth more than $12 million. They'd found their way home, but the story wasn't quite over. 6 months later, as spring returned to the mountains, Marcus stood in the cabin's doorway reading a letter that had arrived with no return address. Emma was at school. She decided to attend Colorado College, close enough to visit but far enough to have her own life. Jake was managing a construction site in Denver, their biggest project yet. Marcus had driven up alone to check on the property, something he did regularly now. The mountains in spring were a revelation. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, streams ran full with snowmelt, and the air carried the scent of pine and possibility. Sarah would have loved it. He could almost hear her exclaiming over each new bloom, insisting they hike every trail to see what was around the next bend. The letter was handwritten on expensive stationery. Mr. Bennett, I knew your great-grandfather well. We served together in Korea before he became respectable. Billy saved my life twice over there, which is why I helped him when he asked, and why I kept my silence all these years. I'm dying now, cancer, the doctors say, and I wanted you to know the truth. The bank theft wasn't Billy's idea. He was recruited by powerful men who used his position and then planned to eliminate him once the job was done. Tommy Nash and Robert Carson weren't his partners. They were his handlers, assigned to watch him and kill him when the time came. But Billy was smarter than they knew. He turned the tables, kept the money, and protected his family the only way he could, by letting everyone believe he was the mastermind. The stress of maintaining that lie killed him, but it kept his family safe. There's more money. Billy told me where, in case his family ever truly needed it. Look where the first Bennett laid the cornerstone. Not all treasures are buried in the ground. A friend, Marcus, read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the fireplace. He'd learned that some secrets were better left as ashes, but that afternoon he found himself examining the cabin's foundation, looking for the cornerstone his great-great-grandfather would have laid in 1952. He found it in the northeast corner, partially hidden by decades of growth. Carved into the stone was WB 1952, and below that, barely visible, a small symbol that looked like a tree. Marcus traced it with his finger, feeling a slight depression. When he pressed, the symbol sank into the stone with a soft click. Nothing happened for a moment. Then a section of the foundation swung inward, revealing a narrow space behind. Inside was a metal box, smaller than the one under the floorboards, but obviously placed with the same care. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He opened the box to find not money, but documents, deeds to mining claims throughout Colorado, all properly filed and registered in the 1952 under various names. A note in William Bennett's handwriting explained, "Bought with honest money before the trouble. Saved for the family's future. Some legacies are worth preserving." There was more. Photographs of William in Korea, standing with the man who'd written the letter, military commendations, a Medal of Honor for saving 3 men under heavy fire. Evidence of the hero William had been before he'd become something else. Marcus spent the next month quietly researching the claims. Most were worthless, played out, or never valuable to begin with. But 3 showed promise, especially with modern extraction methods unavailable in the 1,950 seconds. Conservative estimates suggested they could be worth millions if properly developed. This time, Marcus didn't keep the secret alone. He told Emma and Jake everything, showing them the claims and explaining their provenance. Together, they formed a family trust, bringing in lawyers to ensure everything was legal and above board. So great-great-grandpa was a hero after all? Emma asked after absorbing the full story. I don't know about hero, Marcus said carefully. He was a man who got in over his head, made terrible choices, but tried to protect his family. He was complicated. Aren't we all? Jake observed. They decided to develop one of the mining claims, using the proceeds to establish a foundation for families affected by white-collar crime. It seemed fitting, taking wealth built on tragedy and transforming it into something healing. The cabin became their retreat and headquarters, a place where 3 people who'd stumbled onto a fortune and secrets learned to build something better than gold, a future founded on truth, hard work, and the understanding that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing what to do with it. What happens next will shock you as the family uncovers one final secret that connects their past to powerful people still seeking what was hidden. The truth about why those men really wanted William Bennett dead reveals a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 2 years after they'd found the mining claims. Marcus was in his Denver office, reviewing contracts for a major commercial project. Their business had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. The secretary knocked, her expression concerned. There's a woman here to see you. Says it's about your great-grandfather. She looks official. The woman who entered was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room before settling on Marcus. Mr. Bennett, my name is Director Catherine Walsh, Federal Reserve. I believe you found something that belongs to us. Marcus kept his expression neutral. The stolen money was returned to the insurance company 2 years ago. I'm not talking about the bank theft. She placed a photograph on his desk. William Bennett standing with 2 men in military uniforms. I'm talking about what your great-grandfather took from Korea, what he was really hiding. Marcus studied the photo. He'd never seen it before, but one of the uniformed men looked familiar, the same sharp features he'd seen in the letter from his great-grandfather's friend. I don't understand, he said carefully. Director Walsh smiled thinly. In 1951, your great-grandfather's unit discovered something in Korea, not gold or money documents, proof that several major American corporations had been secretly trading with the enemy, selling weapons and supplies to both sides. The men who discovered this were supposed to destroy the evidence. Instead, they kept it as insurance. She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. Those documents would still be explosive today. Some of those corporations became pillars of American industry. The families involved are now senators, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices. They've been looking for this evidence for 70 years. And you think my great-grandfather had these documents? We know he did. Just as we know that the bank theft was orchestrated to silence him when he threatened to expose the truth. Carson and Nash weren't bank robbers. They were cleanup men, hired to retrieve the documents and eliminate your great-grandfather. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Everything he thought he knew was shifting again, like looking at a familiar picture from a different angle and seeing an entirely different image. But he was too smart, Walsh continued. He hid the documents, probably in the same place he hid the money. When he died before revealing the location, everyone assumed they were lost forever until you started renovating that cabin. We found nothing but money and gold, Marcus said. The FBI searched every inch. The FBI was looking for hidden currency, not 70-year-old papers. Did you find anything else? Any containers, packages, anything that seemed unimportant? Marcus thought back to the original discovery. There had been something else in the container, Beneath the gold bars, a leather portfolio he'd barely glanced at, assuming it contained more bank documents. The FBI had taken it along with everything else. Or had they? There was a leather case, he admitted, but the FBI has it now. Walsh shook her head. We've reviewed everything the FBI cataloged. Either the documents weren't there, or, she paused meaningfully, someone removed them before the authorities arrived. The implication hung in the air. Marcus stood abruptly. I think you should leave. Mr. Bennett, these documents represent a clear and present danger to national security. People have killed for them, will kill for them. If you have them, I don't, then someone does. And when the families involved learn about your discovery, they'll come looking. We can protect you, but only if you cooperate. After she left, Marcus immediately called Jake and Emma. They met at the cabin that evening, the place that had become their sanctuary and strategic headquarters. She's suggesting I kept something from the FBI, Marcus explained, but I didn't. I saw the leather case, but I never opened it. Wait, Emma said suddenly. Remember the first night, before the FBI came? You had me photograph everything for insurance purposes, in case they tried to claim we'd kept anything. Marcus's heart leaped. Emma retrieved her laptop, scrolling through hundreds of images from that chaotic night. They're shots of the leather portfolio, and in one image, it had fallen open slightly, revealing yellowed papers covered in official stamps. Can you enhance it? Jake asked. Emma zoomed in. The text was mostly illegible, but they could make out official military letterhead and what looked like lists of companies. Standard Industries, American Steel Corp., dozens of names. Some Marcus recognized as current Fortune 500 companies. My God! Marcus breathed. It was real. But if the FBI has this, Jake said, why is Walsh looking for it? Emma was typing rapidly. I'm checking the FBI evidence log from our case. Here, everything's listed: money, gold, bank documents, no mention of any leather portfolio. They sat in stunned silence. Someone had removed the portfolio between Marcus's discovery and the FBI's arrival. But who? And where was it now? There's something else, Emma said quietly. That night, when Carson showed up, remember I ran outside to call 911? I grabbed more than just your phone, Dad. I grabbed the leather portfolio, too. I didn't know what it was, but I figured anything you'd hidden under a tarp must be important. I stuffed it in the old root cellar where Great-Grandma used to store preserves. Marcus stared at his daughter. You've had it this whole time? I forgot about it in all the chaos. It's probably still there, unless the FBI found it. But they were focused on the cabin, not the outbuildings. The answer came at 3 a.m. when Marcus was awakened by Rusty Emma's golden retriever, named for his predecessor who'd passed the previous year barking furiously. Through the window, Marcus saw shadows moving around the cabin's perimeter. Emma, Jake, wake up, he whispered, grateful they'd all stayed at the cabin. We have company. They gathered in the main room, lights off, watching as at least 4 figures systematically searched the property. These weren't random thieves. They moved with military precision, using night vision equipment and maintaining perfect silence. The root cellar, Emma whispered suddenly. They're heading for the root cellar. Before Marcus could stop her, Emma had slipped out the back door, Rusty at her heels. Jake and Marcus watched helplessly as she vanished into the darkness. The intruders were getting closer to the root cellar, their search pattern methodical and thorough. Marcus made a decision. Get ready to run, he told Jake, then flipped on all the exterior lights at once. The sudden illumination caught the intruders off guard. Marcus got a good look at them, professional operators in tactical gear, definitely not common criminals. Federal agents, one shouted. Nobody move. But these weren't feds. Marcus had dealt with enough federal agents to recognize the real thing. These men were private contractors, corporate mercenaries. Where are the documents? The lead operator approached the porch, weapon raised. We know you have them. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, buying time, praying Emma had reached the root cellar. William Bennett stole classified materials in Korea. Those materials surfaced when you opened his hiding spot. We want them back. The FBI took everything, the man smiled coldly. No, they didn't. Someone was clever enough to remove the most important item. We've already checked with your friend Jake's ex-wife. your daughter's roommate from last semester. They know nothing. That leaves you. A gunshot split the night. Not from the mercenaries, from the tree line. Director Walsh emerged, accompanied by a real federal tactical team. "Stand down," she commanded. "Federal agents." What followed was chaos. The mercenaries scattered, a brief firefight erupted, and when the dust settled, 2 contractors were in custody while the others had melted into the forest. "I told you they'd come," Walsh said to Marcus. "You're lucky we were monitoring." "You used us as bait," Jake accused. "We protected you while drawing out the people who've been hunting these documents for decades." She turned to Marcus. "Now, where's the portfolio?" "Dad." Emma emerged from the darkness, muddy but triumphant, carrying a leather portfolio. "I found it." Everyone turned to stare. Emma looked confused by the attention. "What?" she said. "I remembered seeing Grandma Rose hide something in the old root cellar when I was little. She said it was insurance. I figured it was worth checking." Walsh reached for the portfolio, but Marcus stepped between them. "No," he said. "Not until you explain everything, the real truth this time." Walsh hesitated, then nodded. "Inside. This will take a while." They gathered around the restored dining table, the portfolio unopened between them. Outside, federal agents secured the perimeter. "In 1951, Walsh began, "your great-grandfather's unit stumbled onto a massive supply depot that wasn't supposed to exist. It was run by American contractors, selling weapons to Chinese forces. The operation went all the way to the top senators, generals, captains of industry. William Bennett and 2 others documented everything before the depot was destroyed in an accidental fire that killed most of the unit." She gestured to the portfolio. "Those documents don't just implicate dead men. They show a pattern of war profiteering that continued through Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The same families, the same companies, generation after generation. That's why they've never stopped looking." "And the bank theft?" Marcus asked. "A setup from the start. They knew William had the documents, but not where. The theft was designed to get him federal attention, force him to run, make mistakes. Instead, he hid everything and kept quiet, probably planning to release it all eventually. His death wasn't a heart attack," Emma said quietly. "You're saying they killed him, most likely. But he'd already hidden the evidence. Your grandmother knew something, that's why she moved the portfolio from the cabin to the root cellar. She was protecting it, and you." Marcus opened the portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of documents, shipping manifests, bank transfers, coded communications, and photographs of American military equipment in enemy hands. Names jumped out, some he recognized as current political and business leaders. "This is dynamite," Jake whistled. "These families basically own half of Washington." "Which is why," Walsh said, "we need to handle this very carefully. Going public would cause a crisis that could destabilize the entire government. But we can use this to quietly clean house, force retirements, end dynasties of corruption. Or," Emma said firmly, "we could do what great-great-grandpa wanted, tell the truth." The room fell silent. Marcus looked at his daughter, 21 now, fierce and uncompromising like her mother had been. "The FBI could classify this forever," Emma continued. "These families would face no real consequences. They'd just be more careful next time." "You don't understand the ramifications," Walsh began. "I understand that my great-great-grandfather died for this truth, that my family spent 40 years living with the consequences of his choice. That won't end with another cover-up." Marcus felt a surge of pride. "She's right. This ends now, in the light." Walsh's expression hardened. "I can't let you." "Yes, you can," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly man in a wheelchair, pushed by one of Walsh's agents. He was perhaps 90, thin but alert, with eyes that held decades of secrets. "My name is Colonel James Patterson," he said. "I served with William Bennett in Korea. I'm the one who wrote you that letter, Mr. Bennett, and I'm here to ensure my friend's last wishes are honored." He produced a thick envelope from his jacket. "William gave me this before he died, told me to deliver it only when the whole truth could be revealed. I've waited 40 years. I won't wait any longer." Inside the envelope was William Bennett's full confession, detailing not just what he'd discovered, but why he'd made his choices. He named names, provided proof, and explained how the bank theft had been orchestrated to silence him. But most importantly, he revealed the location of one final piece of evidence. He made copies, Patterson explained, distributed them to 5 trusted friends. I'm the last one alive, but the others established a dead man's switch. If anything happened to them, the documents would be released automatically. That system is still in place, still waiting. Director Walsh, you have exactly 72 hours to arrest everyone implicated in these papers, or they go public worldwide. Walsh's face had gone pale. You can't be serious. Some of these people are criminals who've profited from war for 70 years, Patterson finished. William died believing justice would eventually come. Don't make him a liar. The next 72 hours changed America. High-profile arrests, emergency congressional sessions, and resignations at the highest levels of government and industry dominated the news. The story of William Bennett, war hero, bank thief, and ultimately whistleblower, captivated the nation. Marcus, Emma, and Jake found themselves at the center of a media storm, but they weathered it together, supported by the truth and by the cabin that had sheltered so many secrets. The scandal exposed by the documents reached further than anyone imagined. Dozens of officials resigned, several corporations faced federal prosecution, and new oversight measures were implemented to prevent future war profiteering. Emma became an advocate for government transparency, using her platform to push for stronger whistleblower protections. The mining claims they discovered proved valuable indeed, but Marcus insisted the profits go to veterans organizations and families affected by the wars that had enriched the exposed conspirators. It seemed fitting turning blood money into healing funds. Colonel Patterson passed, away 6 months after the revelations, finally at peace. At his funeral, Marcus learned that Patterson had been more than William's friend. He'd been the one who helped fake the heart attack, giving William time to hide the evidence before the killers arrived. A final act of loyalty in a war that had never really ended. Your great-grandfather saved my life in Korea, Patterson had written in a final letter to Marcus. I couldn't save his, but I could preserve his truth. Now that debt is paid. The cabin still stands in the Colorado mountains, no longer hiding secrets, but hosting family gatherings where the whole truth can be told. Emma brings her law school friends there, teaching them about integrity and the courage to stand against corruption. Jake's construction company, now thriving, maintains the property as a personal project. And Marcus, he keeps a photo on the mantle. William Bennett in his Army uniform, young and idealistic, before the weight of terrible knowledge changed his path. Below it sits a simple plaque. Truth is the only foundation that lasts. The Bennetts had learned that lesson the hard way, through decades of secrets and lies, theft and redemption. But in the end, they'd proven that even the darkest family history could be transformed into a legacy of light. Sometimes, late at night when the wind whispers through the pines, Marcus swears he can feel his great-grandfather's presence in the cabin, not a ghost, but a satisfied spirit finally at rest. The burden of truth has been passed on and honored. The circle is complete. The $12 million hidden under the floorboards had been only the beginning. The real treasure was the truth William Bennett had died protecting, and the courage of his descendants to bring it into the light. That inheritance, unlike stolen money, could never be taken away. In the end, the cabin that had hidden America's darkest secret became the birthplace of its reckoning. And that, Marcus often thinks, as he watches the sun set over the mountains, is a restoration worth every sacrifice they'd made to achieve it. The story made Hollywood come calling, but the family turned down every offer. Some truths they'd learned were too important to be turned into entertainment. Instead, they established the Bennett Foundation for Investigative Journalism, funding reporters who dug into corruption and war profiteering. Because William Bennett's war had never really ended, it had just passed to a new generation, one that understood that the price of truth was eternal vigilance, and that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism was refusing to keep your country's darkest secrets. The cabin stands ready for the next battle, the next truth that needs telling. And somewhere, Marcus is certain William Bennett is finally at peace, knowing that his family finished what he started, not with violence or theft, but with the simple, revolutionary act of telling the truth. That's the real secret hidden under the floorboards of that old cabin, that ordinary people faced with extraordinary corruption can choose to be extraordinary themselves. And that choice, more than any amount of money, is the true treasure worth finding. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of family secrets, hidden treasures, and the power of truth. Remember to hit that subscribe button and click on one of the 2 amazing stories on your screen right now. You won't want to miss what happens next.